The ghost of Jack Callahan drove a rust-eaten Ford pickup that was as hollowed out as he was. Every pothole on the forgotten county road was a fresh percussion of failure, the chassis groaning like a dying man. November bit at the world with teeth of ice, stripping the oak trees bare and leaving them like skeletons clawing at a bruised gray sky. He was heading home, but home was just a place to die. The Callahan farm hadn't been a home in 20 years. It was a graveyard of good intentions, a monument to a life he'd run from the second he was old enough to sign his name on a dotted line for Uncle Sam. He'd traded the scent of turned earth and summer rain for the stink of cordite, sweat, and copper. He'd swapped the quiet hum of cicadas for the high-pitched whine of incoming rounds. It had been a good trade for a time. It had given him a purpose, a tribe. It had forged him into something sharp and deadly, a tool for the dark places of the world. A Navy SEAL. Master Chief Petty Officer Callahan. A name that meant something. Now it meant nothing. The man who held that title was buried in the sands of Afghanistan, along with the rest of his team. Jack was just the haunt that remained, a collection of scars and phantom limb pain held together by cheap whiskey and stubborn spite. His discharge papers called it post-traumatic stress disorder. Jack called it Tuesday. The memories were relentless passengers. The pressure wave of the IED, a physical blow that stole the air from his lungs. The world turning to grit and thunder. The screaming. Then the silence, which was so much worse. He remembered crawling, his leg a ruin of shattered bone and shredded muscle trying to reach Rico. His friend's eyes were open, staring at a sky he could no longer see. The team's dog, a magnificent Belgian Malinois named Aries, lay beside him, a loyal sentinel even in death. Survivor's guilt was a dull razor he used to carve himself up in the quiet hours of the night. He'd spent the last 3 years drifting, working cash jobs on fishing boats and oil rigs until the shakes got too bad, or the nightmares made him scream in the bunkhouses. He'd lost it all. The pride, the mission, the brotherhood. Now, the truck was running on fumes and so was he. The farm was the last stop, a final fitting bookend to a story of ruin. He had his father's old service revolver tucked under the driver's seat. It was clean. It was ready. The truck sputtered as he turned onto the dirt track that led to the property. Weeds choked the lane, their dead stalks scraping against the undercarriage. The gate was ahead, a lattice of rust held together by memory alone. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the skeletal trees. This was it, the end of the line. He reached for the glove box for the flask that was his only remaining friend. Then he heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was thin, weak, a sound of pure misery that cut through the layers of numbness he'd wrapped around his soul. A whimper. He froze, his hand hovering. He listened. It came again, followed by a faint, desperate scrape of metal on metal. Every instinct, long dormant and buried under a mountain of pain, snapped to attention. Threat, distress, victim. The words flashed in his mind like target acquisitions. He slowly opened the truck door, the hinges screaming in protest. The cold air was a slap in the face, sharp with the smell of wet decay and damp earth. Jack moved with a predator's economy, his limp barely noticeable. He approached the gate. The whimper grew more frantic, and then he saw her. Chained to the rusted gate-post was a German shepherd. She was a ghost of a dog, her bones a sharp relief beneath a coat of matted, filthy fur. Her ribs were a washboard of starvation. A thick, crude chain was cinched tight around her neck, digging into her skin, and it had rubbed a raw, bloody patch there. One of her back legs was bent at an unnatural angle, swollen and caked with dried mud and blood. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. He'd seen those eyes before. He'd seen them in the faces of young recruits after their first firefight. He'd seen them in the eyes of refugees fleeing a bombed-out village. He'd seen them in his own reflection in the shattered mirror of a VA hospital bathroom. They were eyes that had seen the worst of the world, and had given up hope of ever seeing anything better. They were filled with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion, but there was something else in them too. A flicker of defiance, a refusal to completely break. She tried to stand as he approached, a low, weak growl vibrating in her chest, but her injured leg gave way, and she collapsed with another pained cry. Behind her, nestled in a pathetic mound of dead leaves and trash, was the source of her hopeless defense. A wriggling pile of newborn puppies, their eyes still sealed shut, blindly searching for warmth and sustenance from a mother who had nothing left to give. Jack felt a crack form in the ice around his heart. This creature, broken and starving, was still trying to protect her own, still trying to do her duty. She was a soldier holding a post she could not possibly hold. He saw Rico. He saw Ares. He saw himself. Another soldier left behind to die. The plan to end his own life didn't vanish. It was simply postponed. A new mission objective had presented itself. Easy, girl, he whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp from disuse. He held his hands out, palms open, showing he was unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. The dog's growl subsided into a low whine. She watched his every move, her body tense with a mixture of fear and a desperate flickering hope. Jack knelt slowly, the cold mud soaking through the knee of his worn jeans. He ignored the shooting pain from his own ruined leg. Her pain was greater. A rumble of an engine broke the stillness. A beat-up pickup truck, even worse than Jack's, barreled down the lane, spitting gravel. It skidded to a halt, and a large, florid man spilled out of the driver's side. He reeked of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. His face was a mask of belligerent stupidity. The hell you doing on my property? The man slurred, grabbing a tire iron from the bed of his truck. Jack rose slowly to his full height. He didn't recognize the man. This was Callahan land, had been for 100 years. This isn't your property, Jack said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The man, Earl, gestured with the tire iron toward the dog. Don't matter, that's my bitch. She ain't been worth a damn since she dropped that litter. Was gonna deal with her today. Now get the hell out of here before you get hurt. Deal with her. The words hung in the air cold and ugly. Jack's vision narrowed. The wind, the trees, the gray sky, it all faded away. There was only the threat, the weapon, and the objective. Protect the asset. Earl took a step forward, puffing out his chest. He was a classic bully, used to fear being the only currency he needed. He saw Jack's limp, his worn clothes, his haunted eyes, and he read it all as weakness. It was a fatal miscalculation. You deaf boy. I said. Jack moved. It wasn't fast, not in the traditional sense. It was an explosion of purpose. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next he was inside Earl's guard. His left hand shot out like a viper, clamping around Earl's wrist, his thumb digging into the nerve cluster there. The tire iron clattered to the ground. Simultaneously, the palm of Jack's right hand struck the base of Earl's throat. It wasn't a killing blow, just a perfectly placed strike to steal the air and the fight from him. Earl choked, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All his drunken bluster vanished, replaced by pure primal terror. He was looking at something he didn't understand. Jack wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature. His eyes were not haunted anymore. They were Arctic ice. Listen to me very carefully. Jack's voice was a low whisper, more terrifying than any shout. This farm is mine. This dog is now mine. You will get in your truck. You will drive away. And you will never ever come back. If I see you again anywhere near here, I will not be this gentle. Do you understand me? Earl, gasping for air, could only manage a series of frantic, desperate nods. Jack released him. He didn't shove him. He simply let go, and Earl scrambled backward like a crab, falling over his own feet. He crawled to his truck, fumbled the door open, and tore away, his tires spinning in the mud, leaving only the stench of his cowardice behind. The silence returned, deeper this time. Jack's adrenaline receded, leaving the familiar ache in its wake. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. For the first time in years, they felt like his own. He had acted. He had protected. He had enforced a small, brutal piece of justice in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. He turned back to the dog. She had watched the entire exchange, her head cocked. The fear in her eyes was being replaced by something else. Assessment. Curiosity. He picked up the fallen tire iron. Using it as a lever, he found the weakest link in the heavy chain, and with a surge of effort that sent a bolt of agony up his leg, he snapped it. The sound of the breaking link was the loudest thing he had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage opening. It was the sound of a new beginning. The dog, now free, didn't run. She took a hesitant step toward him, then stopped, looking from him to her pups. Her duty held her fast. Okay, soldier, Jack said softly. Let's get you and your fire team to a secure location. The barn was a skeleton of what it once was, with missing boards that let the wind whistle through, and a roof that was more whole than shingle. But it was shelter. Jack found an old horse blanket, shaking off years of dust and mouse droppings, and laid it in a dry corner of an empty stall. He gently gathered the squirming pups, their tiny bodies surprisingly warm, and placed them on the blanket. The mother dog, who he had started to think of simply as Mama, watched his every move. She limped behind him, a silent, pained shadow. Once her pups were safe, she nudged them with her nose, giving a soft whine before collapsing beside them, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. Jack went back to his truck and retrieved his old medic bag. It was a relic from his service, something he could never bring himself to get rid of. The contents were sparse, some expired saline, combat gauze, antiseptic wipes, a suture kit. He knelt beside her. "Gotta take a look at that leg, girl," he murmured. "This might hurt." She flinched when he reached for her, a low growl rumbling in her chest, but she didn't snap. Her eyes were locked on his. He moved slowly, deliberately, his movements radiating a calm competence she seemed to understand. He gently cleaned the gash on her leg. It was deep, infected, and smelled of rot. As he worked, his fingers tracing the line of her fur, he felt it. A patch of skin inside her ear that was different, smoother. He carefully folded her ear back. There, faded but unmistakable under the grime, was a tattoo. It wasn't a crude brand from a backyard breeder. It was precise, military, a series of letters and numbers. MWDK9, 7B41. Jack's blood ran cold. Military working dog. This wasn't just some stray Earl had abused. This was a veteran, a fellow soldier. The rage that had been a dull ember in his gut for 3 years roared into a white-hot inferno. Someone had taken one of their own, a warrior, and had chained her to a post to starve to death. This was more than cruelty. This was a desecration. He finished bandaging her leg as best he could, his movements now fueled by a cold, hard purpose. He gave her the last of his water in an old hubcap he found, and watched as she drank greedily. He needed to make a call. He pulled out a battered burner phone, a habit he'd never broken from his old life. There was only one number in it he knew would still work. He prayed the man on the other end would pick up. It rang twice. "Wallace." The voice was clipped, impatient, exactly as Jack remembered. "It's Callahan," Jack said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jack, my God, where are you? Are you all right?" Commander Wallace had been his CO, a man who saw the teams not as assets but as his men. He'd fought the brass to get Jack better care, but Jack had pushed him away, pushed everyone away. "I'm fine, that's not why I'm calling," Jack said, cutting to the chase. "I'm at my family's old farm in Virginia. I found a dog, a German shepherd. She's in bad shape. She has a tattoo in her ear. MWDK9, 7B41. The silence on the line was now heavy, charged. Jack could hear the faint click of a keyboard. "Read that again, Master Chief." Jack repeated the designation. He heard Wallace curse, a sharp, violent sound. "That's not possible, Jack. 741. That's Valkyrie. She was listed as KIA, Kandahar Province, 18 months ago." Kandahar. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. The same province. "Whose dog was she?" he asked, his voice tight. "She was handled by a SEAL from Team 4, Marcus Thorne," Wallace said. "Their unit was hit a month after yours was. The report said she was killed in the same blast that got Thorne. The paperwork was sealed, classified under a joint task force operation. A ghost, just like him. A dead dog, walking." "Well, she's not dead, Commander," Jack said, his voice hard as iron. "She's in my barn with a litter of pups and a leg that's turning septic. She was chained up and left to die." "Jesus Christ," Wallace breathed. "Something's not right. This stinks to high heaven. Jack, you can't stay there. If someone went to the trouble of faking a K9's death, they're not going to be happy she's turned up. They're not amateurs. I'm not leaving her." The words were an oath. "I know," Wallace said, a note of weary resignation in his voice. "Okay, I trust you, but she needs a real vet, someone who knows how to handle these dogs and can be discreet. There's a woman, Dr. Anya Sharma. Her clinic is about 60 miles east of you. I'm texting you the address. I'll call ahead and tell her you're coming. She's one of us. Go now, Jack. I'm going to start digging on my end. Something's about to break loose." The line went dead. Jack looked at the dog, now sleeping fitfully, her body curled protectively around her pups. Valkyrie, a chooser of the slain, a warrior's name. "All right, Valkyrie," he said to the sleeping dog. "Looks like we're going back to war." The drive to the vet clinic was a tense 60-mile journey through deepening twilight. Valkyrie lay on the passenger seat, her head on Jack's lap, a silent act of trust that weighed more than any metal. The pups were in a cardboard box on the floor, their soft squeaks a fragile counterpoint to the truck's rattling engine. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on the dog's head, his senses on high alert. Every pair of headlights in his rearview mirror was a potential threat. Every shadow on the side of the road was an ambush. He was back in the predator mindset, a state he knew as well as his own name. Dr. Sharma's clinic was a small, unassuming building on the edge of a quiet town. The lights were on. As Jack pulled his truck into the empty parking lot, a woman stepped out. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and intelligent, cautious eyes. She wore green scrubs under a heavy coat. This was Anya Sharma. "You must be Jack," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "Commander Wallace called. He said it was an emergency." Her eyes went immediately to the dog in the truck. "Let's get her inside. Now." Together they carefully moved Valkyrie onto a gurney. Jack carried the box of pups. Inside the clinic was a world of sterile steel and the clean, sharp smell of antiseptic. It was a stark contrast to the decay of the farm. Dr. Sharma was all business, her movements efficient and sure. Wallace said she was MWD, Anya said as she began examining the injured leg. He wasn't kidding. She pointed to a faint scar high on Valkyrie's shoulder. "That's from a harness rub, standard issue for airborne insertions. And this nick on her ear, that's from shrapnel." She looked at Jack. "She's seen more combat than most soldiers." "So have I," Jack said quietly. Anya met his gaze, and for a moment, a flicker of understanding passed between them. She nodded, then turned her attention back to the dog. "Her leg is badly infected. I'll need to sedate her, clean it out, and see if the bone is fractured. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, but she's a fighter. Whoever did this..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I need to check her chip," Anya said, pulling out a scanner. "Wallace said her file was sealed, but maybe I can get something." She ran the scanner over Valkyrie's back. It beeped. A string of alphanumeric code appeared on the small screen. "Encrypted," she muttered. "Department of Defense, high level. I can't even access the basic registration. This is way above standard MWD classification." As she spoke, the headlights of a vehicle swept across the front windows of the clinic. A black late-model SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot and parked, blocking Jack's truck. It had no license plates. Jack didn't hesitate. "Get in the back," he ordered Anya, his voice dropping into the command tone she'd only heard stories about. "Lock the door. Do not come out." "What? Who is that?" she asked, her eyes wide with alarm. "The people who don't want her to be alive," Jack said, already moving toward the front of the clinic. He flicked off the lights in the waiting room, plunging it into shadow. Two men got out of the SUV. They weren't drunk thugs like Earl. They were quiet, professional. They wore dark jackets over what Jack instantly recognized as body armor. They moved with the fluid, coordinated grace of men who were used to violence. Mercenaries. Cleaners. One of them knocked on the door, a polite, firm rap. Jack remained silent in the shadows, his heart a slow, steady drum. He was no longer a broken man. He was an operator in his element. The clinic was his kill box. "Dr. Sharma," one of the men called out, his voice calm, reasonable. "We're here about a missing dog. We have reason to believe she's here. She's stolen corporate property. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard." Corporate property. Wallace was right. Jack's hand went to the revolver he'd tucked into his waistband. This wasn't about a dog anymore. This was about a conspiracy, about the desecration of a soldier. He heard the click of a lockpick at the door. They were coming in. Jack melted back into the hallway that led to the examination rooms, positioning himself beside a heavy steel gurney. The door swung open and the two men entered, sweeping the room with small, powerful flashlights. They moved in a practiced tactical formation. "Clear," the first one whispered. "Check the back rooms," the second one ordered. As the first man moved past his position, Jack exploded from the shadows. He shoved the steel gurney with all his strength. It slammed into the mercenary's legs, sending him crashing to the floor with a cry of pain. The second man spun, raising a silenced pistol, but Jack was already moving. He grabbed a heavy-duty stainless steel EV pole from its stand. In his hands, it was not a piece of medical equipment, it was a quarterstaff. He swung it in a vicious arc, connecting with the second man's gun hand. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the pistol clattered across the tiled floor. The man screamed, clutching his shattered wrist. Jack didn't give him a chance to recover. He reversed his grip on the pole and drove the base of it into the man's sternum. The air rushed out of him and he collapsed, gagging. The first man was getting to his feet, pulling a backup weapon. Jack was on him in an instant. The fight was close, brutal, and silent except for the grunts of exertion and the thud of fists against flesh. Jack moved like a phantom, his training taking over completely. Every strike was precise, disabling. A jab to the throat, a knee to the solar plexus, an elbow to the temple. The merc was good, but Jack was better. He was a SEAL. He was born in this kind of violence. He had the man disarmed and on the defensive when a searing pain erupted in his side. A third man. There was a third man. He had come around the back. He stood in the doorway, a knife in his hand, a cruel smile on his face. Jack staggered back, his hand flying to the wound. It was deep. Blood was already soaking through his shirt. His vision swam. The first merc saw his opening and lunged. Suddenly, a black and tan blur of fury shot from the back room. The door, which Anya had locked, was splintered at the frame. Valkyrie, high on adrenaline, ignoring her own pain, launched herself through the air. She hit the third man with the force of a freight train, her jaws locking onto his knife arm. The man shrieked, a sound of pure agony and terror. That was all the opening Jack needed. Despite the fire in his side, he surged forward. He drove his shoulder into the first merc, sending him stumbling back. He scooped up the fallen pistol. The man with the shattered wrist was trying to get up. Jack didn't aim. He fired twice. Two soft coughs from the silencer. The man dropped. The third man finally threw Valkyrie off him, his arm a mangled ruin. He raised his knife to strike at the dog. Jack fired again. The man crumpled. The first merc, the one Jack had fought hand to hand, made a desperate dive for the door. Jack aimed, his hand steady despite the blood now running down his leg. For her, he rasped, and fired. The man fell face first onto the welcome mat and didn't move. Silence. The smell of bleach and terror and hot blood filled the air. Jack leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor, pressing his hand against the wound in his side. It was bad. Valkyrie limped over to him. She nudged his hand with her nose, then began to lick his face, whining softly. She had saved him. This broken, starving dog had taken a knife for him. The locked door to the back room creaked open. Anya Sharma stood there, her face pale with shock, a large syringe held in her trembling hand like a weapon. She took in the scene, the bodies, the blood, the quiet man and his dog sitting together amidst the carnage. Her eyes met Jack's. "You need a doctor," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Jack just nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "You came to the right place." Just as Anya rushed to his side, her medical training overriding her fear, the night was split apart by the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the gruesome scene in strobing colors. Local police. They were about to walk into a slaughterhouse with a decorated seal, a traumatized vet, and 3 dead bodies. It was a nightmare scenario. "They're not going to understand," Anya said, pressing a thick wad of gauze against Jack's bleeding side. "Jack, what are we going to do?" Before he could answer, a black sedan without marking screeched into the lot, cutting off the first arriving police cruiser. The doors opened and Commander Wallace stepped out, flanked by 2 stone-faced men in Naval Criminal Investigative Service jackets. He strode into the clinic like he owned it, his eyes taking in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. He looked at the bodies, at the dog, standing guard over Jack, and finally, at Jack himself, bleeding on the floor. "Took you long enough," Jack grunted. Wallace knelt beside him, his face a grim mask. "I came as fast as I could. The hornet's nest you kicked is bigger than I thought." He turned to the bewildered local police officer who was standing in the doorway, his gun drawn. "Commander Wallace, United States Navy," he said, flashing his credentials. "This is a matter of national security. My men and I are taking command of this scene. Secure the perimeter and keep everyone back." The officer, out of his depth, could only nod and retreat. Wallace turned back to Anya. "Doctor, keep working on him. An ambulance is 5 minutes out, but it's one of ours. It'll take him to a secure medical facility." Then he looked at Jack and his voice softened. "I know, Jack. I know what you're thinking. You want to know why." He glanced at Valkyrie, who was still pressed against Jack's side. "It's worse than we imagined." As Anya worked to stabilize him, Wallace laid it all out. The men Jack had killed worked for a private defense contractor called Aegis Dynamics. They had a multi-billion-dollar contract to manage the logistics of military working dogs in theater, including their transport, care, and humane retirement. Only they weren't retiring them, Wallace said, his voice laced with cold fury. The CEO, a retired two-star general named Peterson, was running a black market operation. He was faking KIA reports for the best dogs, the ones with elite genetics and training, and then selling them to the highest bidder. Mercenary outfits, foreign governments, wealthy collectors. A dog like Valkyrie is worth $250,000 to the right buyer. The name hit Jack like a punch to his wounded side. General Peterson. He'd been the one to sign off on the intel for Jack's last mission. The intel that had led his team into a perfectly planned ambush. The intel that had gotten Rico and the rest of them killed. It wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a deeper corruption. Valkyrie was on a transport to be sold when her convoy was hit by insurgents. Wallace continued. In the chaos she escaped. Aegis has been hunting for her ever since. She's living proof of their entire criminal enterprise. When you called me, and I started pulling on that thread, their internal alarms must have gone off. They tracked your burner phone. They sent their best retrieval team to clean up the mess. He gestured to the dead men. Looks like they weren't good enough. The pieces all clicked into place. The sealed file, the fake KIA report, the professional killers. It was all connected. His past and his present had just collided in a small vet clinic in rural Virginia. This wasn't just a random act of cruelty he had stumbled upon. It was the rotten core of the very system he had fought and bled for. The system that had used him up, broken him, and then thrown him away. Just like it had thrown this dog away. He looked at Valkyrie. She stared back, her intelligent eyes seeming to understand everything. She wasn't just a dog he had saved. She was the key. She was his absolution. By saving her, he was getting justice for his men. He was exposing the lie that had cost him everything. A profound cleansing wave of emotion washed over him. It wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't the cold numbness he had lived with for years. It was grief. A deep, aching sorrow for his friends. For this loyal dog. For the man he used to be. For the first time since he'd crawled out of that crater in Kandahar, Jack Callahan wept. He buried his face in Valkyrie's fur, and the tears came, hot and silent. The dog whined and licked away the salt from his cheeks. In the middle of the carnage, surrounded by the wreckage of his past, the broken soldier and the broken dog held on to each other, two survivors of the same forgotten war, finally finding their way home. 1 year later, the Callahan farm was no longer a graveyard. Life had returned to the fallow fields. A new fence, straight and strong, traced the property line. The barn roof was patched, the house had glass in its windows, and a thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, a friendly beacon against the crisp blue of an autumn sky. The ghosts were still there, but they were quieter now. They were memories, not haunts. Jack stood on the porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The limp was more pronounced on cold mornings, a permanent reminder of the price he'd paid. The scars on his face and the fresh one on his side were maps of his journey, but his eyes, once hollowed out by despair, held a quiet peace. He was no longer a ghost haunting his own life. He was a man rebuilding it, one plank, one nail, one day at a time. A tennis ball dropped at his feet. He looked down. Valkyrie sat there, her tail thumping a steady rhythm against the wooden porch. Her head cocked, her eyes bright with health and expectation. Her coat was thick and glossy, her body strong and muscled. She was the picture of a noble warrior, her past trauma visible only in the fierce loyalty with which she watched him. All right, you win, Jack said, a small smile touching his lips. He threw the ball. It sailed in a high arc across the yard, and Valkyrie took off after it. A black and tan streak of pure joy. She was joined in the chase by two younger, lankier German shepherds, the sole survivors of her litter, now nearly grown, a testament to her resilience. A car pulled up the gravel drive. Dr. Anya Sharma got out, carrying a bag of groceries. She had become a regular visitor, first to check on her patients, and then slowly, to check on their rescuer. An easy companionship had grown between them, forged in violence and nurtured in the quiet work of healing. She walked up the steps and handed him the bag. Commander Wallace called, she said, her tone light. General Peterson was sentenced this morning. Life, no parole. Aegis Dynamics has been dissolved, its assets seized by the government. Jack nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. He felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of closure. A debt had been paid. Good, was all he said. He also said your full back pay and disability benefits have been finalized, Anya added, watching his face. You're a rich man, Jack. He looked out over the land, at the dogs playing in the sun. I've got everything I need right here, he said. He'd used some of the initial funds Wallace had secured for him to buy the farm outright. It was his. It was their sanctuary. Valkyrie trotted back, the ball in her mouth, and dropped it at his feet again before leaning her full weight against his good leg, a familiar gesture of affection and ownership. He absently stroked her head, his fingers tracing the faint scar on her ear. He had gone to the farm to die, to join the ghosts of his past. Instead, he had found a reason to live. He had found a new team, a new pack. It wasn't the one he had lost, but it was the one he had found. A doctor with kind eyes, a fiercely loyal dog who had been to hell and back, and her pups, a promise of a future. He had saved Valkyrie from a rusty chain, and she in turn had saved him from the invisible chains that had bound him for so long. They were two broken soldiers who had found a way to mend each other, building a new life from the ruins of the old. The war was finally over. They were home,